Welcome to the First Case Expert Series. I'm your host, Melanie Perry, and joining me in the studio today is our perioperative instrument coordination expert, Jeff Wertz. Jeff, last episode, we looked at the importance of communication and visibility and bringing everybody to the table to have those important conversations. And today we're continuing that theme by looking at the people who were involved in that process. Who are the people that we're talking about today, Jeff?
Yeah, I think where we kind of finished last one was really talking about starting small. So to begin with, just at the very least, get your OR team, someone from your OR team and a representative from SPD who can provide these different perspectives. But in addition to that, I think that there's, maybe have a guest visitor that you invite to your meetings or to your coffee, where you can incorporate, surgeon perspective. The vendors are another big one at a lot of facilities where there's challenges that I think opening up that line of communication brings in a unique perspective because, that's near and dear to my heart of the challenges that I faced of when OR and SPD aren't on the same page. It puts us in an awkward position to be, not wanting to create challenges, but right. Ultimately the surgeon's our client in this scenario. So I think that's a really unique one that can be brought in. But I also know that some vendors might talk a little bit more than the OR or SPD really want to hear. But I think it's valuable nonetheless because they are a big component to the overall success of those procedures. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a need for them there. I think another area can be supply chain. And I think those are the big ones to focus on initially, and then kind of breaking down how you want to communicate with them. And I think starting off those conversations, it's really good to just listen and actually observe where they're coming from, what are their motivations, because if we're truly trying to work together in this, you need to understand where they're coming from and what they're motivated by and figure out ways that you can work with them as opposed to against them, because ultimately everyone's moving in the same direction. And I think when you immediately go in with preconceived notions of what they're dealing with or how they go about things, you can miss a lot. And ultimately, if you're trying to move the needle on this, you really do need to listen and understand first and foremost, and then start sharing, hey, well, these are the initiatives that we're trying to move forward with. Is there anyone that I'm missing there that you would add to it or disagree with?
No, I don't disagree for sure. And I think it's very valuable that you included vendors because our vendors play such a critical role in our cases and they provide so much for our departments on a regular basis. And I know that all of us historically have had some relationships with vendors that were greater than others. There's been some conflict or some struggle with communication and having things available, but they are a critical piece to the puzzle when it comes to the people that are in our departments that need to be included when we are planning, when we are implementing, when we are trying to communicate new goals. And so, no, I'm really glad that you included them. But supply chain also always gets forgotten, or I feel like they frequently get forgotten. And so remembering the people who are ordering our stuff, the people who are making sure that we have the equipment and the things that we need, they have a voice that needs to be heard as well. So it's very good that you included those two groups. It seems like the OR and SPD and surgeons comes top of mind, but vendors and supply chain is very important as well.
Yeah. And I think in those conversations, I think to the communication point brings up where I would say, the translation of language
right
is really, really critical. I know from a rep's perspective, I would equate that's what the reps are doing most of their day is translating what the surgeon's asking for to the back table, to the OR nurse, to SPD at every single hospital. And it's different at every single hospital. And even when you're talking to supply chain, they might call one thing completely different than SPD does, and it's a cost to them. So there's these different translations of language that needs to take place, and it needs to happen in these conversations. I think the reps, the good ones that are out there are really trying to make things as smooth as possible, and they'll do that extra effort to do it. But I think what a lot of them are looking for is standards and expectations that are clear for them. So I think it's critical as you're going through these discussions, what are the challenges that you're facing at your facility that we can help with? that I can better communicate with you guys on a regular basis and try to accomplish the mutual goal of probably a safer surgery, more efficient for sterile processing, and just better overall communication between all those departments. The language barrier just comes top of mind to me on making sure that you're having those conversations to establish what the foundation is and a common language to be, discussing with everyone.
Yeah, I think it's.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually just sitting here thinking, like, what language barriers did I experience between myself and the OR versus sterile processing, and something as simple as what we call an instrument can be a very big problem when you're calling up to SPD desperately needing a big ugly, and sterile processing is like, what in the world are you talking about? And you go up there and you're like, fine, I'll just get it myself. And you grab it like, oh, well, that's a mother-in-law. We could have gotten that. And because our words are different, we just miscommunicate and it leads to frustration. So a simple example for sure, but one that we see time and time again in the words we use, the way we understand, or our motivators for things drive the way we communicate. And everybody isn't always on the same page when it comes to an awareness or an understanding. So I guess maybe the question is also to ask, how do we figure out how do we come together to understand maybe what the OR really knows about SPD or what the SPD really knows about the OR?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the initial conversations. So I think it's as simple as that is you're going to find these instances come up. From a rep's perspective, that was a lot of the value that I drove, was being that translator for everyone, to the point where I would get calls in the middle of the night of, hey, where's this instrument? The doctor's in a different case that you're not involved with, or we're looking for this, and I can provide that knowledge. I can only imagine how challenging it is for an SPD tech that's working overnight to get a call from the OR and say, hey, we need this mother-in-law clamp. And they're like, I just started, a month or two ago. Like, there's I don't even know where to begin to look for something like that for you. So I think having that initial conversation and having that cadence in place, you're gonna start finding these little challenges along the way that you can start smoothing that out. SPD can start making cheat sheets, whatever it is, leverage the technology that's at hand. Some of the systems are able to put secondary names that SPD and OR, miscommunicate on, so that you can find that common ground. There are solutions out there for that, but the first step is making sure that you're aware of it and then sharing that with the rest of the departments. And I think that's a really easy starting point, that once you understand the different challenges that they're facing, that seems small for maybe the OR where you're hearing that regularly, but SPD being able to say, this is where we're coming from. We were trying to assemble a set, or we were in, decontam, fully gowned, and we didn't have time to go in and look at, and you're asking me something out of the blue, taking me out of my work. Those are the types of perspectives that need to be brought in and communicated on, and there needs to be the understanding that this is how we can do it moving forward. We had a hard time last week. Now we're changing that because we've set this baseline of communication, and now we can share that with the rest of our department. So
we want to achieve this. This is where we want to be, but how do we get there?
Yeah, I think so. From these meetings, I think looking at, and once you've established that communication, we can address the things that we were just speaking to, just the language barrier. But now, what do we really want to accomplish? For as many hospitals as you've been in, I'm sure each one has similar challenges, but some of them might be prioritized differently. So if we're looking at efficiency being a challenge, or we're looking at error reporting being a challenge, what do we actually need to put in place to evaluate that? And kind of what we talked about previously on our last episode was getting that perspective and what actually goes into it. And, is there scanning involved, or how are we communicating these challenges in that transfer of assets or trays or instruments, making sure that we put in measurable, attainable kind of goals from that week-to-week meeting that can be evaluated and then adjusted. So I think, what we want to talk about in the next episode is getting the alignment on those pieces, in setting realistic goals of what we want to achieve, knowing that it's experimental. I think that, I'll kind of preface it a little bit, not letting perfect be the enemy of good, and starting small for these initiatives, and say, let's just get the ball rolling. We're going to kind of figure it out as we go, and we'll fine tune it. Any progress is better than no progress.
Yeah, I think a great phrase there is progress, not perfection, because we just have to get started. And if we only look to be perfect, then we will never make progress just by making an effort, being open-minded to maybe having to regroup and try again, but at least we're trying. So we've covered so much, and there's still so much to go in our next conversations. So make sure that you tune in next time as Jeff answers those why questions for us, and he shows us how an understanding of why helps us to reach the alignment on our goals that we really are so desperate to achieve. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching this week's episode of the First Case Expert Series.